The man at table 7 had been sitting quietly for 11 minutes before anyone decided he was a problem. That's how it starts, most of the time. Not with a shout, not with a confrontation. It starts with a look, a decision made somewhere behind someone's eyes before a single word gets spoken. One person looks at another person and decides without evidence, without cause, without a single fact to stand on. Decides what that person is, what they're worth, whether they belong. On a Tuesday morning in Clover Falls, Georgia, that decision took 11 minutes to become something the whole town would be talking about for years. The Crossroads Diner sat at the intersection of Highway 9 and Mill Street, which meant it sat at the intersection of everywhere and nowhere. Truckers stopped there. Farmers stopped there. County workers on their lunch breaks, high school kids after football practice, couples who'd been married so long they ate in comfortable silence. They all stopped at the crossroads. The coffee was strong, the pie was real, and the waitstaff had been there long enough that they knew your order before you sat down. Hank Purvis had managed the crossroads for going on 12 years. He was a broad man, thick through the shoulders, with the kind of jaw that looked like it had been formed by a lifetime of clenching. He wore his authority the way some men wear a uniform, not because anyone gave it to him, but because he decided, somewhere along the way, that the space he occupied belonged to him. His diner, his counter, his town. He was standing behind the register when the door opened. The man who walked in was somewhere in his early 50s, tall, broad-shouldered in a different way than Purvis. Not thick, but solid, the way a man gets when he's worked his whole life at something that matters. He was wearing civilian clothes. Dark pants, a plain gray button-down, sleeves rolled to the forearm, no tie, no briefcase. A watch on his left wrist that was expensive if you knew what you were looking at, which Purvis did not. The man, his name was Samuel Okafor, though no one in that diner knew that yet, walked to a booth along the window and sat down. He picked up the menu. He waited. Purvis watched him from behind the register for a moment, the way a man watches something he hasn't categorized yet. Then Purvis's jaw set in that familiar way, and he turned to the woman refilling coffee at the counter. "Gina," he said quietly, "table 7. Gina looked up. She was 61 years old, had worked the crossroads for 9 of Purvis's 12 years, and she had a daughter at Georgia State and a mortgage she was 2 years from paying off. She looked at table 7. She looked at Purvis. Something moved across her face that was not quite agreement and not quite protest. Something caught in between. And then she nodded and picked up her order pad. Samuel Okafor had driven 4 hours to get to Clover Falls. He wasn't there for the diner. He wasn't even there for the town particularly. He was there because a man named Judge Arthur Penfield had called him 3 weeks ago and asked him to speak at the dedication of the new Clover Falls Community Center, a building that had been funded, in part, by a federal grant that Samuel had helped secure back when he was still at the Department of Justice. That was 6 years ago. He'd been retired for 2 years now. But Judge Penfield was the kind of man who remembered things, and the dedication was that afternoon, and Samuel had left Atlanta at 6 in the morning because he didn't like to rush. He'd pulled off Highway 9 at 9:47 because he was hungry and because the Crossroads Diner had a sign out front that said, "Best biscuits in 3 counties," and Samuel Okafor had a weakness for biscuits that he'd never quite managed to outgrow. So he sat at table 7 with his menu and his reasonable expectations and his quiet, and he waited. Gina came over. She didn't quite meet his eyes. "What can I get you?" she said. "Pen ready." "Good morning," Samuel said. He had a voice like good furniture, warm, solid, built to last. "I'll take the eggs over easy. The biscuits bacon if it's thick cut and a large coffee. Black, please." Gina wrote it down. She started to go. "Excuse me," Samuel said. Not loud, just clear. "Do you have a morning paper? I didn't see one up front. I'll check," Gina said and walked away. She didn't bring a paper. She brought his coffee and she set it down without meeting his eyes, and she went back to her station. Samuel watched her go. He was not surprised. He was 53 years old and he had lived in the American South for most of his life, and he understood how certain rooms felt before anything happened in them. He'd been in enough of them. He knew the weight of being watched by someone who had already decided. He drank his coffee. It was good. He looked out the window at the parking lot, at the highway beyond, at the flat Georgia morning stretching out under a sky that hadn't decided between blue and gray yet. He was a patient man. He had learned patience the hard way, the way most people learn it, by spending years in rooms that made you earn it. He waited. Hank Purvis came over at 10 o'clock. Not to take an order, not to check on a customer. He came over the way a man comes over when he's decided to do something and is doing it before he thinks better of it. He put both hands on the edge of Samuel's booth. He leaned in slightly. "I'm going to need to see some ID," Purvis said. Samuel looked up from his coffee. His face didn't change much. His eyes were very still. "I'm sorry? Identification," Purvis said. "I like to know who's in my diner." There was a pause. Not a long one, maybe 3 seconds. But anyone paying attention, and several people in the Crossroads diner, were paying attention now. In that particular way, people pay attention when something is happening that they don't want to acknowledge they're watching. Those 3 seconds had weight to them. "You asked every customer in here for identification this morning?" Samuel said. "I run my place the way I see fit," Purvis said. "You got a problem with that. You're welcome to eat somewhere else." Samuel looked at him for a moment. He looked at the hands on the edge of the booth. He looked at the jaw, the set of the shoulders, the particular species of certainty on Purvis's face. Then Samuel Okafor reached into his back pocket, took out his wallet, and produced his driver's license. He set it on the table. He did not hand it to Purvis. He set it on the table and looked back out the window. Purvis picked it up. He looked at it the way people look at things they've already decided are suspicious, studying it not for information but for confirmation. He read the name out loud, which he didn't need to do, but which had a particular effect on the room. Samuel Okafor. He said it like he was trying it out, like the name itself was a question he was asking the diner. "That's correct," Samuel said, without turning from the window. "Where are you from, Mr. Okafor?" "Atlanta." "Long way from Atlanta, 4 hours," Samuel said. "Closer to 3.5 if you hit the highway right." "I didn't." Purvis looked at the license again. He turned it over. He looked at the back. He looked at the front again. He was holding it at a slight distance, as if the thing might be unstable. "What's your business in Clover Falls?" Samuel turned from the window then. He looked at Purvis directly, the way a man looks at something he has measured and found wanting. "I'm having breakfast," Samuel said. "Eggs over easy, biscuits and bacon, if the bacon is still coming." Something flickered in Purvis's face, irritation, mostly. And underneath that, something else. The particular frustration of a man who expected a different response and doesn't know what to do with the one he got. He set the license down on the table. He didn't hand it back. He set it down with a small, flat sound, like a statement. "I'll need you to wait outside while we verify a few things," Purvis said. The diner had gone quiet, not silent. There was still the sound of the kitchen, the distant radio, the mechanical whir of the old ceiling fan, but quiet in the way a room gets quiet when everyone has stopped pretending they're not listening. "Verify what exactly?" Samuel said. "Don't make this difficult." "I ordered breakfast," Samuel said. "I've been sitting here quietly. I haven't made anything difficult. I'd like to understand what is happening." And then Purvis said it. He didn't shout it. He said it in a low, flat voice, like it was a reasonable thing to say, like it was a fact about the weather or the price of eggs. "Men like you don't just pass through Clover Falls," Purvis said. "Not unless there's a reason. And I intend to find out what the reason is." The booth creaked as an older man at the counter shifted on his stool. A woman near the back set down her fork. The sound it made against the plate was very loud in all that quiet. Samuel Okafor looked at Hank Purvis for a long time. "Men like me," Samuel said. He didn't phrase it as a question. He didn't raise his voice. He said it like he was picking up something heavy and holding it where everyone could see it. "Men like me." He wanted the room to hear it. He wanted the room to sit with it. The room did. Sheriff Vic Benton arrived 9 minutes later. He was Purvis's cousin-in-law, which everyone in Clover Falls knew, and which was not, technically, relevant to what was about to happen, except that it explained the phone call and the speed of the response and the particular way Benton walked in through the diner's front door. Not like a man responding to a call, but like a man answering an invitation. Benton was in his 40s. He had the look of a man who had been told he was important, often enough that he'd started believing it as a kind of structural truth, like gravity. He was not cruel, exactly. He was something more ordinary than cruel. He was comfortable with his own authority in a way that made him blind to its edges. He spotted Samuel at table 7 and walked over without speaking to anyone else. "There's a problem here," he said. He directed this at Purvis, who was still standing near the booth. "Just doing my due diligence," Purvis said. "Got an out-of-toner. Won't say what his business is." I said I was having breakfast, Samuel said. Benton looked at Samuel the way a man looks at something he's been told is a problem and has decided to treat accordingly. Can I see some ID, sir? Mr. Purvis already has my license, Samuel said. He gestured at the table where his license was still sitting. I've answered every question I've been asked. I ordered breakfast 45 minutes ago. I have not raised my voice or made any kind of disturbance. People in this diner have concerns, Benton said. What concerns? Samuel said. Specifically. Benton didn't answer that. He picked up the license. He studied it. Atlanta, he said. Yes. What are you doing in Clover Falls, Mr. Okafor? I have an engagement this afternoon, Samuel said. I drove up this morning. I stopped here because I was hungry. I ordered eggs and biscuits and bacon. That is the complete account of my activities. Benton set the license down. He looked at Samuel. Something moved behind his eyes. Not quite decision, but the thing that comes just before decision. I'm going to need you to step outside with me, Benton said. Am I being detained? Samuel said. I'm asking you to come outside voluntarily. Then I'm declining voluntarily, Samuel said. I haven't finished my breakfast. The pause that followed was the kind of pause that has consequences. Benton felt it. Purvis felt it. Everyone at the counter and in the nearby booths felt it. This moment where a man who had been expected to comply had simply and quietly refused to comply, and now the whole situation had to recalculate. Benton's jaw tightened. Sir, I'm going to ask you one more time. I heard you the first time, Samuel said. I've answered your questions. I've provided my identification. I have done nothing that creates any legal basis for you to remove me from a public accommodation. If you'd like to discuss that further, I'm happy to do so. But I'm not stepping outside. The diner was very, very quiet. What happened next would be reconstructed later by at least a dozen different people, and each reconstruction would be slightly different, but certain details stayed consistent across all of them. Benton told Samuel he was going to have to pat him down. Samuel asked for the basis. Benton said he'd received a report of suspicious behavior. Samuel asked who had filed the report. Benton said that wasn't relevant. Samuel said it was actually extremely relevant and that he would like the name. Purvis, who had been standing to the side, said, and multiple people confirmed this, that he'd seen Samuel acting erratically in the parking lot before he came in. Samuel asked what specifically he had done. Purvis said he'd been casing the place, and then Benton said he was going to conduct a pat-down for the safety of everyone in the diner, and Samuel said that was not going to happen, and Benton's hand went to his belt. Don't, Samuel said, very quietly. Don't do this. Sir, put your hands on the table. You are making a serious mistake. Hands on the table. Samuel Okafor put his hands on the table. His face was the face of a man who has been in difficult rooms before, who knows how these rooms can go, who is calculating, in real time, how to come out the other side of this intact. Not just physically, intact in every way that matters to a man who has spent his life building something. He was handcuffed at 10:22 in the morning, at a booth by the window in the Crossroads Diner on Highway 9 in Clover Falls, Georgia, in front of approximately 23 people, while his eggs sat cold on a plate. Gina had quietly brought out during the confrontation and had sat down at the edge of the table because she didn't know what else to do. No one said anything. The woman near the back, her name was Dorothea. She'd lived in Clover Falls her whole life and had 3 grandchildren and had always considered herself a good person. Dorothea opened her mouth and then closed it again. A man at the counter named Boyd, who was 40 years old and had arms like bridge cables from 20 years of farm work, looked at his coffee cup. A young woman near the door, maybe 25, with a baby in a carrier on her chest, watched with her hand pressed flat against the baby's back, like she was trying to protect the child from the air in the room. No one said anything. Hank Purvis crossed his arms and watched with the expression of a man who has gotten what he wanted and is deciding how to feel about it. Benton walked Samuel toward the door. Samuel walked without resistance. His hands were behind him. His back was straight. His face was still. He had been in this country long enough to know that the straightness of your back in a moment like this is one of the few things that belongs entirely to you. And he held on to it like what it was, the last piece of dignity in a room that was trying to take the rest. The door swung shut behind them. The diner exhaled. Outside in the parking lot, Benton walked Samuel toward the cruiser. The morning was warming up now, the gray burning off the sky, the highway running its quiet, relentless hum beyond the lot. You want to tell me what's actually going on? Benton said. His voice was slightly different out here, away from the audience. Not softer exactly, but less performed. I told you what was going on, Samuel said. I was having breakfast. Where'd you say your engagement was this afternoon? I didn't say where, Samuel said. I said I had one. Benton stopped walking. Samuel stopped walking. They stood in the parking lot in the morning light. You're not going to make this easy, are you? Benton said. I've been making it easy, Samuel said. I've answered every question. I've stayed calm. I've kept my hands where you could see them. I've been making it as easy as I know how to make it. The difficulty isn't coming from me, Sheriff. I think you know that. Something passed across Benton's face. It was brief and he controlled it quickly, but it was there. A flicker of something that wasn't exactly doubt, but was cousin to it. The first sign that the room he'd been living in, the room where he was right and this was reasonable and everything was fine, had developed a small crack. Before he could respond, a car turned into the parking lot. A dark blue town car, county plates. It rolled slowly to a stop near the entrance, and the driver's door opened, and a man got out. Older, 70 at least, white-haired, moving with the particular deliberateness of a man who has earned the right to move at whatever pace he chooses. Judge Arthur Penfield. He stood beside his car for a moment, taking in the scene. His expression was the expression of a man who has seen a great many things, and is not surprised by this one, exactly, but is disappointed in the particular way that distinguished people allow themselves to be disappointed. He walked toward them. Benton watched him come. Judge Penfield, Benton said. There was something careful in his voice now, careful in a way it hadn't been inside. Victor, Penfield said. He looked at Samuel. He looked at the handcuffs. He looked at Benton. What is happening here? What is happening here? Penfield said again. Not louder, just more deliberate. Benton opened his mouth. That man, Penfield said, gesturing at Samuel, is Dr. Samuel Okafor. He served for 19 years in the United States Department of Justice, the last 7 of which he spent as Deputy Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights. He is here today at my personal invitation as the keynote speaker at the dedication of the Clover Falls Community Center, which this county has been building for 4 years, and which would not exist without work he did when no one in this town was paying attention. Penfield paused. He is also, Victor, one of the most recognized civil rights attorneys in the southeastern United States. He has argued before the Supreme Court. He has written 3 books. He has received a presidential medal. And he is standing in a parking lot on Highway 9 in handcuffs, which I'd like you to explain to me. The highway ran its quiet hum. A semi rolled past on the road beyond the lot, moving south. Benton said nothing. Take those off, Penfield said. It was not a request. The door of the Crossroads diner opened at 10:38. Samuel Okafor walked back in. He was not in handcuffs. He walked the way he had walked when he came in, not hurrying, not performing, just walking. He went to table 7. He sat back down. He picked up his coffee, which was cold. The diner watched him. Gina was standing near the counter with an empty coffee pot. She was looking at him. Her face had the look of a woman who has been standing in a doorway for a long time, not going in either direction, and has finally decided to move. She walked to the machine. She brewed a fresh pot. She carried it to table 7. Fresh coffee, she said. Samuel looked up at her. Thank you, he said. She poured. Her hand was not entirely steady. Cough, dark and solid, filled the cup. Your eggs are cold, she said. I can have them remake it. All of it, no charge. She paused. I should have said something. Earlier. I should have. She stopped, started again. I'm sorry. Samuel looked at her for a moment. He had, in 19 years at the Department of Justice, encountered a great many things. He had sat across the table from men who didn't think he belonged in the room. He had worked on cases that took years and ended badly. He had written policies that mattered and watched other policies get undone. He had been in airports and restaurants and hotels and conference rooms and courtrooms and parking lots, and he had carried the weight of being seen wrong in each of those places and had kept moving anyway because the alternative was to stop, and stopping was not something Samuel Okafor did. He looked at Gina, at her unsteady hand, at the genuine distress on her face. Yes, he said simply, you should have. Gina nodded. She didn't argue with it, that was the thing. She didn't try to explain it away or soften it or redirect it. She just nodded the way you nod when someone says a true thing that you already knew was true. I'll get your order remade, she said. She went back to the kitchen. Hank Purvis had positioned himself behind the register. He had watched Samuel walk back in. He had watched Judge Penfield follow him in and take a seat at the counter with the unhurried ease of a man who owns his chair in any room he enters. He had watched Gina pour the fresh coffee. He had heard none of what was said because he was too far away, but he had read the shape of it. He was standing behind the register with his arms crossed and his jaw set, and the particular look of a man who does not know how to be wrong without becoming angry at the world for making him so. Penfield, at the counter, ordered coffee. He looked at Purvis without urgency. "Hank," he said. "Judge," Purvis said carefully. "You've been running this place a long time." 12 years, Purvis said. "Good diner," Penfield said. He looked into his coffee cup. "Be a shame if it became known for the wrong reasons." He didn't say anything else about it. He didn't need to. He drank his coffee and read the laminated specials menu and chatted with the man on the stool next to him about the weather, and he didn't look at Purvis again. Purvis uncrossed his arms. He crossed them again. He looked at the register. He looked at the kitchen window. He looked at table 7, where Samuel Okafor was sitting, waiting for his breakfast. He went into the back. The diner began to return to something like itself. The hum came back. Conversations, the scrape of utensils, someone near the window laughing at something their companion said. The ceiling fan turned. The coffee machine made its sounds. The kitchen moved. But some things had changed in the room, the way rooms change after something real has happened in them. The woman named Dorothea, who had opened and closed her mouth and said nothing, now sat very still over her nearly untouched plate, looking at a spot on the table. She would think about this morning for a long time. Not with guilt, exactly. Something more complicated than guilt, something that required her to examine things about herself she'd found it easier not to examine. Boyd, at the counter, set down his coffee cup. He looked at Samuel's booth. He considered something. Then he got up, walked across the diner, and stopped beside table 7. "I should have said something," Boyd said. He said it the same way you'd drive a nail. One shot, clean, not looking for applause. That wasn't right. What happened in here? I sat there and I didn't say a word, and that was wrong. Samuel looked at him. "Sit down," Samuel said. Boyd looked surprised. "Sit down," Samuel said again. "You're saying the right thing. You don't have to stand there to say it." Boyd sat down across from him in the booth. He didn't know why. It just seemed like the thing to do. They talked for a while. Not about what had happened, exactly. About Clover Falls and Atlanta and what the new community center was going to mean for the county, and Boyd's farm and how the highway had changed the town over the years. Small things. Big things that dressed as small things. When Samuel's breakfast came, fresh eggs, biscuits that really were the best in 3 counties, thick-cut bacon. He ate it while they talked, and the food was good, and the coffee was hot, and somewhere in the middle of it, Boyd started to understand something he hadn't understood when he sat down, and Samuel, who had spent his career believing that understanding was possible, even here, even after mornings like this one, let him get there at his own pace. The dedication ceremony was at 2 o'clock. The Clover Falls Community Center was a clean, bright building on the east side of town, with large windows and a gymnasium and a room for job training and another for after-school programs. It had taken 4 years to build, which meant it had taken years before that to plan and fund and fight for, and the fight had been real. Grants denied and reapplied for, county meetings with thin attendance and thick opposition, paper trails and phone calls and late nights that nobody but the people in the room would ever know about. Samuel stood at the podium and looked at the crowd. There were perhaps 200 people, families, children, elected officials in the second row. Judge Penfield in the front, his white hair bright under the auditorium lights. Samuel did not talk about the morning. He did not talk about Table 7, or Hank Purvis, or what it felt like to have cold metal on your wrist while your breakfast got cold on a table nearby. He did not talk about any of that. He talked about the building. About what a building means when it's built in a place that has had to fight to believe it deserves things. He talked about the people who show up to city council meetings and get ignored and show up again. He talked about what it means to build something permanent in a place that has been told its needs are temporary. He talked about his grandmother, who had driven her grandchildren past buildings they could not enter, and had said, in her quiet way, that they would see things change in their lifetimes, and had been right, and had not lived quite long enough to see all of it. The room was very still while he talked. Not the still of discomfort, the still of attention, the real kind, The kind where people are not thinking about anything else, not checking anything, not preparing their response, just listening, because what is being said is worth listening to. When he finished, the applause started slowly, the way it does when people have actually felt something and need a moment to come back to the surface. Then it built. Samuel stood at the podium and let it run. He did not rush away from it. He had earned the right to stand in it for a moment, and he did. Afterward, outside, in the warm Georgia afternoon, a young woman approached him. She was maybe 22, and she worked at the community center, and she had driven 40 minutes to attend the ceremony on her day off. "I want to do what you did," she told him. "The law, civil rights. I've applied to 2 law schools. I'm still waiting." Samuel looked at her. She had the look of someone who had already survived several things that would have stopped other people, and knew it and hadn't decided yet whether that was something to be proud of or just a fact. "Where'd you apply?" he said. She told him. He nodded. "Have you talked to anyone there about your application?" he said. "I didn't know I could do that." "You can," he said. "You should. The application is a document. A conversation is something else." He reached into his jacket pocket and found a business card. Old habit. He'd been retired 2 years but still carried them. He held it out to her. "Email me in 2 weeks. Tell me what happens with the applications. If nothing's moved, we'll talk." She took the card with both hands carefully, the way you take something you intend to keep. He shook her hand and walked to his car. The drive back to Atlanta was 3.5 hours. Samuel took it without the radio, mostly with the windows cracked and the early evening light coming flat across the Georgia landscape. He drove through towns whose names he'd been hearing his whole life, and through towns with no names he could see, past fields and tree lines and the long, flat distances that made this part of the country feel, in the right light, like something that had been waiting for a long time. He thought about Gina's unsteady hand on the coffee pot. He thought about Boyd sitting down across from him in the booth, not knowing why. He thought about the young woman with the business card. He thought about his grandmother who had driven past buildings. There is a particular kind of endurance that doesn't get celebrated much because it doesn't look like anything from the outside. It's just a man sitting in a booth, still, while the room reorganizes itself around him. It's just a man walking back in through the door. It's just a man who knows something will try to take his dignity, and who holds on to it anyway, not because he isn't tired, but because the cost of letting go is higher than the cost of holding on. Samuel Okafor had been holding on for 53 years. He had a few more miles in him. He drove south into the evening toward home.